Excited to ask my next speaker to come up and join me on stage. We are honored to have Dr. Sue Desmond-Hellman, who's the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with us today. The Education Commission of the States has had a long-standing relationship with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And what we try to do in a lot of our meetings is bring some unique perspectives to the conversation. And so I'm really excited to have the perspective of Sue here, who can share with us what she's seeing around some of the issues around equity. Sue has a very interesting career with over 30 years of service in science and in medicine. And in 2009, there were quotes about work she had done to help cure cancer in Forbes magazine that I want to read. It said in the 2009 Forbes magazine that she was one of the 7 most powerful innovators in the world, calling her a hero to legions of cancer patients, as she had been helpful in developing 2 of the first gene-targeted therapies for cancer. Along with her amazing work and amazing achievements, Sue was also the first female president, chancellor of the University of California at San Francisco. And what I was most impressed with, she's on the board of directors for Facebook, but she hasn't accepted my friend request yet. I'm excited, and please join me in welcoming Sue to talk about equity and her perspective. You've had a lot of time to kind of see things from a more global perspective. And it's not just travels, but it's where there's some investments with the foundation. And talk a little bit about what some of those experiences have been, and especially how do they link with kind of education mobility, and even education mobility becoming part of career mobility for our future workforces.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank you for asking me to join you here this morning. I have to say it brought a smile to my face when you talked about 2009 and that amazing sense of moving from doing cancer research to becoming chancellor and moving to higher ed. I'm most excited to be here because there's 51 Teachers of the Year in the audience. So I have to tell you, I stand on the shoulders of prior to you guys, Teachers of the Year that I got to interact with. So I am thrilled to be in your presence. That's why I'm here today. My career has been, and it's lovely to call it interesting, it's sometimes been described as chaotic, but I'm trying to take advantage of all the best of it. As CEO of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I get to work every day in a building that has this wonderful tagline: all lives have equal value. All lives have equal value serves as a guiding light for all of us. Now that's more like a slogan than a plan. And so what I thought might be helpful in light of what this audience cares about is to think about a couple of the ways that we bring to life all lives have equal value, that we believe everyone on earth should have the opportunity for a healthy and productive life. When Bill and Melinda started the foundation in 2000, they really looked at this in 2 very different ways. One way was outside of the US, where inequity in access to basic things on health, measles vaccine, things that are preventative care, clean water, healthy mother care, the absence of death during childbirth. These are things that when Bill and Melinda first were exposed to them, they were shocked. They couldn't believe that anyone in 2000 would still be faced with not having access to cheap vaccines. So our focus outside of the US historically started with health. That all lives have equal value is through that lens of health. In the US, we come at it differently. In the US, since the earliest days of our focus on education, it's been because we feel that in the United States, it's what people call the American dream. I mean, so many of us have been part of that American dream. My mom and dad were the first in their family to go to college. I'm one of 7 kids. And so that American dream, that escalator to equity has always been education. So our pillar of belief that all lives have equal value here in the US is our focus on education. And that has been, and particularly these days, I remind people that was true 8 years during the Bush administration, that was true 8 years during the Obama administration. It remains true that we're committed to equity in the US by focus on our US programs. Now, a couple things have been particularly interesting for me on my learning curve for the last 3 years. And I want to point out that some of what we just heard I thought was just spectacular in thinking about the hard questions. What does it mean to move back to thinking about states? It can mean some really great things.
Yes.
It can make flexibility, innovation. I love hearing words like that. I love flexibility and innovation. And then I think Claudia said so well, but what's the threat? Is the threat that it's less equitable? Is the threat that achievement gaps go more broad? So one of the programs I wanted to just briefly tell you about that we've been on a learning journey with a grant to the Urban Institute, that all of this is public if you all want to read about it, is an increased focus on the importance of mobility from poverty. And we've focused on that in no small measure because of some emerging evidence of how much place matters. Place matters. So when I hear things like community-driven, the community looks at things. When we look at your ability as an American to move from poverty and out of poverty, depends on where you live. So that means there's something about place that matters. How can we use those learnings and that understanding and bring that to our education work in service of equity?
So what have you learned in some of those studies and in some of that work on place that has helped with some of the education mobility? I mean, we live in a country now where it's rare for a student to stay in the same school district for their entire 13-year education. In many cases, families are moving. Sometimes financial reasons cause that. Sometimes there's other job reasons. But as we have a core group of 50 million students that we educate in the K-12 system here in America, large majority of them will be in 3 or 4 different schools during that 13-year period. How has education mobility come into that discussion?
Well, one of the things that I think is, again, if we go back to the guiding principle, that it shouldn't matter your zip code, it shouldn't matter who your parents are, that every child should succeed. That's it resonates for me. That's where for us, again, some of the words I've just heard, standards, high standards, accountability. We haven't stopped in our belief that every child, when they exit high school, should be college or career ready. Right. That hasn't changed. How we think about closing those achievement gaps so that no matter where you are, if you've moved, if you've changed schools, if you're an English language learner, no matter what, you have a right to have a great education. And so I think those sorts of things that are true no matter where you are, and your right to that public education is a through line to all of our work. The other thing I would mention is we continue to have a strong belief, no matter where in the world our work gets done, in metrics. Right. Metrics and data. And as a physician, I get privacy. As a Facebook lead director, I get privacy. I get what people are worried about privacy. And so when I say data in light of talking about education, I know some people are going to be nervous about that. And I come back as a physician, I have always pushed myself to say, honor the privacy of that patient and don't let my worry about their privacy get in the way of helping them. I would say the same thing to a teacher, a school district, a principal, a parent, a family, a community, most importantly. How do we make sure that decision makers have the information they need at a school level to drive the decisions they need for that community, those students, those right. families? So I think that the one of the most important things I've loved at the Gates Foundation, and I think our folks in our US programs are so good at this and want so much to partner with you and colleagues in this room. How can we, knowing privacy is a big concern, how can we make sure data, actionable data, gets in the hands of decision makers to drive that equity agenda?
And we see a lot with states looking at that. How do you use a longitudinal data system? How do you actually track children for the better outcomes without moving too far into privacy? But we also see with a lot of the people in this room that we serve, just sometimes it's looking at the metrics based on state policies. We've done a project called the Blueprint for College Readiness in partnership with a lot of the states. But we looked at metrics across, I think, 36 different policies that you may have in your states. And there's some interesting things that we found. I'm sure my number is going to be wrong here because it's not in my talking notes, and my post-secondary director will correct me, but I believe there's 20 states in the country right now who the requirements to graduate high school in that state don't match the requirements to go to college at the state university. Simple policies like that aren't even getting into the privacy aspect. It's figuring out how do we make these transitions seamless across some of these changes from K-12 to post-secondary.
Well, one of the best experiences I've had in the last couple of years is participating in commencement. I mean, everybody loves a good commencement. It's celebratory, it's happy. Commencement and learning is even more fun. So being in Dayton, Ohio at Sinclair Community College, being in Atlanta at Georgia State, what's exciting to me is to see how much they're reaching into the preparation that their students have when they get there. How each student's success is the focus. How at Georgia State they're closing that achievement gap.
Right.
For me, being out and hearing from students their experience, their sense of agency, their sense that the data are there for them and their success, it does change the dynamic. And that link of high school, what my colleague Alan Goldston calls our P through 16 or our P through 20 focus, that through line and the data to allow for that through line and those students to succeed, it's a beautiful thing.
And it's really important. There's some states with some really innovative policies around that. So talk a little bit about where you see equity across the country and what does that mean? It's a really tough word for a lot of us in this room. I spent more than a decade in a state house, and the term equity, when talked with education, usually dealt with a school finance lawsuit. For many of us, it's defined in court cases or it's defined in a law, but how does equity apply from your perspective on what we can be doing across the entire P20 spectrum?
Yeah. Well, if you just think of what does equity actually mean, it's the absence of bias or favoritism. That's not that actionable. So for us at the Gates Foundation, we look at equity in ways that if you're in Nigeria, it might be, did you all have access to the kinds of vaccines that can prevent illness? Did you have access to safe childbirth? For our US programs, for us, equity means no matter where you live, no matter who you are, that you have access to a public education that is equitable. And I think what's been interesting to me and learning from colleagues and learning from the discussion we just heard, what that means in the face of differences of background, differences of opportunity, as we move to the state and to communities, I come at this with more and more humility. I mean, I'm here to learn. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to talk with the panel that's going to follow us. So I want to learn how we all think about equity as driven by community. I think there's something really powerful with ESSA in how communities think about equity. But as Claudia just said, there's going to be parents and civil rights groups saying, okay, that community and how they think about equity, how does that work for all students? One of our funders and trustees, Warren Buffett, says something that makes me smile because I think I'm like Warren. I also won the ovarian lottery. I have a great mom and dad, and we weren't rich, and I just feel like I won the ovarian lottery. They asked me about my homework every night. I liked math. So for me, when I think about equity, before I came to the foundation, it was a lot of chances I had. It was being a Reno, Nevada student who liked math and wanted to be just like my dad, a pharmacist. And my dad saying, "You go, girl." Who gets that? That's the ovarian lottery. The question since I've been at the foundation is if you didn't win that lottery.
Right.
Equity for me is you have just as big a chance as at a healthy and productive life. And I think we've sort of moved from, like you talked about in the State House, to outcomes. And so I do think the discussion about achievement gaps and closing those achievement gaps is the essence of the equity dialogue.
Well, join me in thanking Sue for sharing her thoughts and perspective. Thank you very much, Sue.